Okay, it's my
Okay.
pleasure today to meet with DJ Baddeley and or Daniel, whichever he prefers to go by. I've always known him as DJ. He and I go back quite a few years. We haven't really gotten a chance to sit down and talk at length together, but we've been, I would say, close acquaintances. Every time we see each other at conferences multiple times a year, we always kind of seek each other out and chat for a little bit. But DJ, would you go ahead and start out by giving us some of your background and a little bit of your history, and then how race may have played into that? I should also add that DJ is the offensive coordinator at 4A Woodinville, one of the powerhouses in the state of Washington.
Oh, okay. So appreciate that you're doing this, Coach. This is great. Definitely watched most of the interviews, and it's been just good to hear different stories. So my background is, I guess it is what it is. It's I grew up when I was born. Never actually met my biological parents, and so I was adopted. Actually, been adopted 3 different times, which sounds kind of a weird to say, but it's just kind of my story. And so when I was born, I was placed in foster care, and was then placed with an adoptive family. And then there were just some different situations that happened that kind of took me from that family to another foster care family, and then another placement. And then ultimately, growing up, I moved around quite a bit. I think the first time I attended like one elementary school for a year was 5th grade. So I counted it up one time. I think from the time I was born to 4th grade, I moved, I think, 26 different times. And so it was kind of an interesting kind of upbringing as far as that goes. But ultimately, I ended up settling in Prosser, Washington, over in Eastern Washington, and moved there when I was 10 after kind of living in the Portland area, and then Eastern Oregon for a little bit. And my family over there was an interesting mix. We had I have 5 brothers and a sister, and so I could say everyone that's in the middle. So my oldest brother was my mom's biological son, and then my youngest brother was my mom's biological son. She had remarried, but everyone else in the middle was adopted. So we had kind of a United Nations of family, so to speak. My sister and one of my brothers are both African American. 2 of my brothers were biological brothers, Hispanic. So it's kind of a mix. And so we just kind of grew up in that situation. And so growing up there, ended up in Prosser, which was kind of a lucky break for me. And so for me, athletics has been really great, because it was a place where I could kind of come and get kind of connected. And I think the thing about athletics is it's it's especially team sports, and football being the greatest team sport, gives you an opportunity to develop these relationships, these friendships that for me have lasted for a lifetime. Some of my closest friends are still guys that I grew up playing football with, and all the lessons that I was taught during that time of commitment, hard work, and just being a great teammate, I think were really instrumental in my development. So I really kind of valued that. Had a great coach, Tom Moore, who was my high school coach, came there my freshman year in high school. And so that was just kind of like for me, the stars aligning to be able to play for him and have that opportunity. And then after I got through high school, I attended Willamette University and competed there, played football, ran track a little bit as well. And just kind of going through school, got my degree. My big plan was to go to law school, because if you know me well, I like to talk. And so I thought I'd fit right in kind of that role, and decided to take a detour and got my master's in education, and thinking, that I would do that and teach and look at that as an opportunity, and then potentially go back to school. And then when I got in, I just loved everything about teaching and coaching. I kind of see it really as the same. And I always tell people, I've never really had a bad day at work. Been doing it for 24 years. Love doing it and working with kids. And I just think back to my background and kind of growing up, and how teachers and coaches were really important for me. And so it was just an opportunity to be able to do that, and and seeing the power of that and how that happens, it just ended up being something I wanted to do. And so got hired in the North Shore School District right out of college, and have been at, was at Inglemoor for about 21 years, and then just finished my 4th year at Woodinville. And I've coached at both places, and just kind of, I guess for me, this is the longest place I've ever been somewhere. So I guess call this home now.
Awesome. What fascinating upbringing, and you know, the United Nations of the family where you ended up. Was race something that was something that the family directly talked about, and what kind of experiences did you have maybe in the communities you grew up in related to race?
Well, growing up, it was interesting. You know, the kind of you're exposed to different, racism, and so I guess the answer for that, the short answer would be yeah. But I think that for me, just growing up in different situations, just some of the, and being kind of in a family unit, some of the things, comments being said, things being said around me, those were the types of things. I heard stories when I growing up, my great grandmother she was in my life from the time I can remember, and she maintained that connection even as I moved from different families. And so that was kind of a really important thing for me, as having someone kind of in my corner that I could relate to from the beginning. And she would tell me different stories of, when I was adopted as a baby, the family I was living with at the time, I was walking I was being carried down the sidewalk, and a stranger, saw my adopted mother, who was white, and carrying me, and looked at her and basically said, "How could you?" Implying that it was like she'd had a child with someone who was African American at that, and I was born in 1972, and so I heard different stories of those types of things that were happening. It's kind of interesting. My adoptions, 2 of them were done through private adoption agencies, and there's a big question about, where do you place kids with families? If it's a child that's African American, is it better to place them with an African American family, or a white family? And so all those things in the kind of early 70s were up and running. Mm-hmm. And so I heard those stories. I think the last time really and it's interesting that the thing about racism and how you respond to it. I have one quick story. When I was in 5th grade, and I'd moved to Prosser, one of our teachers had organized this like little running club that we had, and we ran the Bloomsday Run. I don't know if you're familiar with that, over in Spokane. It's like 7.5 mile, this huge kind of event. And so we would train, and then we would go over and run. And one day we were out running, and we would start by the school, and we'd run a lap of, it was about 3.5 miles. So our training, we had 3 trainings. We had one where we do 1 lap, 2 laps, or 3 laps. And so this day we were doing 2 laps, and we just started out. And I remember there was a kid who was a year younger behind me, and we did taken off, and his parents lived kind of on the lap. And so they took out their chairs, and they were just watching us run. And I was maybe about 50, feet ahead of this kid. And his parents were like cheering for him, and they, telling him to go, go, go. And he said, "Oh, don't worry, Mom. I'll never, let a N-bomb beat me." And I was just like, that's the first time I'd really ever heard or been somebody said that to me. And it kind of struck me that the kid would say that to his mom, which, wow, looking back on it, I mean, those are things that are taught. And so I was, needless to say, I was a little bit angry, and I just moved up to the Prosser. And so I just remember just feeling like I was going to explode. And so we got done with our run that day. I kind of looked that kid up, and not proud to say, but we had a little altercation, and physical altercation. And after that, I just remember feeling bad about kind of my part in that. And so from that point forward, I made it a point to look at it as being someone who's going to educate people and communicate, and, not be the combative person, or sometimes it's obviously the natural thing that you get frustrated. But for me, that was never really a thing that was a positive thing. And so moving forward, I think that it's important people are courageous. I think that's the word I like, as opposed to what are you going to do when you're confronting with things? Are you going to say something, and are you going to do something about it? But I think it's also the way that we interact and how we do it. I think, especially in today's times, there's so much like people that not really wanting to listen to each other and have their own opinions and want to kind of expound on their opinion. But I think it's really important to educate. And I think a lot of also, I don't know this if you find this here in the classroom, but I think I hear a lot of kids talk and kids say things sometimes in class about something being racist. And sometimes I draw a distinction between, I think there's racism and I think there's just ignorance or not being aware or being encountering certain things and being educated on those things. And I think they're two different things. And so I think it's important, as educators that we do a great job of,
For those of you just joining us again, you might see new backgrounds. We lost our service earlier, so we had to pick up this conversation where we left off. So what we had just finished at was DJ was talking about the distinction between racism and ignorance, and he was just starting to talk about, as educators, the importance of how we need to help make that distinction. So DJ, maybe if you want to pick up at that point.
Yeah, I think that that's an important thing. I mean, I've taught U.S. history over my career, probably 15 of the 24 years. And so it's one of the things when you're teaching history, I think that it's a fine line because you want to, like the way I present it to kids is I always tell them that we have this great, noble thing that we have in the United States. If you look at all of the foundational documents and what they talk about, it was revolutionary. And then it's just a matter of living up to that and then always trying to perfect that. And so one of the themes that I was teaching history is that the definition of a citizen has become bigger and more inclusive over time. And so you can study things in the past and the other thing that I look at is you can always say, I think that things are, the American dream is to progress and to become better. And so when you start talking about the education process and the part of it, and I think recently with the George Floyd death that happened at the hands of the Minneapolis police officer and the kind of the emotions that stirred up and then the protesting and the demonstrations that brought out, it's this idea that, and I get this, it's interesting because you kids, as you get further and further away from an event in history, it's like, well, we're not like that. So you can talk about the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s and look at some things and people can say, oh, I mean, I'm glad that those things aren't happening. And I think sometimes what gets lost on it is, and some of the people that you've had on here have spoke to some things I won't go into kind of to reiterate, but, the idea of the institutional racism. And I think the way that that's taught is really important because it's, there's this kind of feeling that you get from people, and I have friends of mine from, that I've grown up with that, why are we, being saddled with these things that we didn't do? And so the way in which I think education is a big part of it, teaching how our system works, teaching what everyone's responsibility is as a civic, member of that. And it goes well beyond voting, but just understanding some of the things that have been in place for a long time and how can we do better? And it's, it's not an indictment maybe on the past. For some people it is, but if you take it from a positive standpoint, it's like, how can we become better? And in athletics, that's what we do, right? And so why can't we apply some of those same principles and things to kind of how our society is wired, and kind of what we're doing and becoming better, and more inclusive and addressing issues. But I think the way in which that's done, I think is really important, especially in this heightened sense of whatever we are in right now. I mean, a lot of people are on edge. A lot of people, are getting their information from one source or another source, and a lot of it's social media. And I love social media and I hate social media at the same time because I think that there's some really beautiful things and positive things there. But I also think there's some things that are really detrimental to what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more there. I'd like to touch on some of your unique story. The fact that you were adopted multiple times, and there was a transracial adoption in there, and that is something you mentioned, that was not always accepted, right? 1994 is when there was actually the U.S. Supreme Court, I believe, made some distinctions on whether they would try and keep adoptions within the parent race or not. And so it was controversial from both sides. Some people that didn't want to see mixing of races, and then even African American communities saying, well, we don't want to see necessarily Black children adopted by non-Black parents because it could be a loss of culture. What are your thoughts on how that has all progressed and where we're at today?
Well, I think that you bring up a good, the idea of culture, and it's interesting because we start talking about, race and ethnicity. One thing that's to me it's interesting is there are these cultural, like, people talk about the United States. Is the United States a melting pot, or is it more of like a tapestry? And I like the term of a tapestry because I think the beauty of the United States is it being able to retain some of the unique aspects. And we have in this country, I teach the kids, it's kind of, talking about heterogeneous versus homogeneous. And it's like homogeneous is boring. I mean, if everyone's the same, and I go, but the thing about the homogeneous societies, there's like a lot less differences. There's obviously going to be bound to be less conflict. And I see a lot of problems in like Iceland because everyone, 99% of the people are Icelandic and everyone's just kind of the same. But so for me, I think that what I've taken away, just because, like I said, I've grown up in a little bit of a different, I guess, situation than a lot of people. Just growing up with different families, I've maintained contact with different people in all those families as I've kind of grown up through this process. And I just look back on it. To me, it was kind of a blessing because it gave me an exposure to a lot of different people and different ways of thinking. And also not only that, but living in an urban setting and then a really rural setting. And so I think from that standpoint, my takeaway is that, and you talk about a family, what a family is. And sometimes you think about people, you don't get to choose your family. And so the people that are going to look out for you and the people that are good to you, you'll always kind of keep that in mind. So for me, that's the most important thing, is that in a family situation, that things are being provided, there's a sense of security. And I know that for me was important, because when I was younger, I bounced around quite a bit, and it took a while for me to kind of get through some of those issues, because, growing up, going to elementary school, there weren't a lot of other kids that I could talk to that had that same experience. And so I think that in terms of the adoption and all those things, anybody that wants to take on a child and provide that family unit, to me, that's what it's about. And that's really, I think that's kind of what our country is about. And to go back really quick on the culture piece, it's kind of interesting, because one of the things when you talk about, like, not necessarily racism, but this idea of kind of putting people in different culture groups and having this expectation that sometimes when you have groups that are minorities, that they kind of fit, or they're pigeonholed into a certain category, where if you're in the majority, you can kind of be whoever you want and do what you want to be. And I think that's important also. But a big part of that is just getting beyond seeing people in a group and getting to know them. And that's what to me, sports is so beautiful, because you have kids that, come together, and, you talk about, people always do in sports, it's interesting to me. A lot of teams will do a break and they'll do family. Mm-hmm. And we always tell our guys that, that the football team is an intentional family. I mean, you get to select to be a part of it. You get to select to adopt our, core values that we have, like most programs have, and kind of how we do things. And so in that sense, in a certain way, to me, it's almost the most noble, because in some cases, some people don't get to choose your families. You can't, you break a football huddle and talk about family if it's legitimate and it's true. I mean, it's like something that's been self-selected, and that makes it really unique.
Awesome. So one other thing I'd like to touch on that kind of relates to your story as well is, the idea of privilege, and certainly what you had to overcome with bouncing around and so many things would not classify as privilege, although you have drawn strength from it as well that you just mentioned. I would just like to hear maybe what has allowed you to personally overcome the difficulties you've gone through, and maybe the importance of, with minority groups that may not have all of the privileges, how do they rise up and overcome, and maybe just touch on that part of it a little bit.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. It kind of going back to your interview with Misaki, I think that he kind of nailed it. And when he's talking about how he's, working and doing all the great things he's doing at Lincoln and he did before, that really, at the end of the day, it's really no different. I don't know. I know when I was younger, I knew that I was going to go to college. I had all these plans, and I don't know why I knew it. And I just knew I was going to do these things. And part of it's, I think, because I'm very competitive, probably to a fault when I was younger. And I learned that a lot of those things through athletics. And so to me, competing, I wanted to be the best at athletics. I wanted to be the best in my English, my history, my math, my science. I mean, whatever it was that I was doing, I wanted to compete and kind of not necessarily prove myself, but that's just kind of how I was wired, and just to learn new things. I don't want people, I like people to teach me things so that I can do them. I don't ever want to rely or have somebody else have to do something. I always want to understand it, know it. That's just kind of, that lifelong learner aspect. So I think that's a big part of it. I think that, people talk about different things and what needs to happen with education. And I mean, there's so many factors. There's family aspect to it. But then, in every situation, every scenario, you can look at places, people coming from very difficult positions and being able to make it happen. And so for me, I think it's mentorship. I think it's education. Our job as educators to mentor and to do those things. And so, I've taught and I've had these discussions with people in education where they want to talk about, we can't be the social worker, the parent, and all those things. And it's like, to me, if you're not prepared to do that for those kids, then you should find another job. And I think that's really kind of the mission, is to provide those things and be creative in that, as far as how can you help kids achieve and move on and go from high school and be successful. And a big part of it also, this coach is kind of like walking that talk and living that and being an example as well. Mm-hmm. But also really, I think, encouraging kids and having high expectations. And not only just having high expectations, you have high expectations and not put in the network and the facility for the kids to get that done, but just having that expectation that these kids are going to be able to accomplish these things. And I think sometimes when you talk about certain situations and certain areas, there's an expectation that kids can't achieve, or they can't do these things, or, that they're set up for failure. And so I think having people that come in, someone that's agent of change, that's really motivated and driven to do that, I think is huge. I mean, that was my experience. I look back on some of the biggest impacts for me, it was teachers and coaches. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if they felt sorry for me, or they wanted to help me or whatever it was, but I always felt that I was being supported and being challenged. And I think that was a big piece of it. I think that high expectations, challenging kids, but then also working with them to achieve it, is kind of the key. And so that's where the sports, is an extension of the classroom. It really is, in my mind, it's no different. I'm going to work as hard for a kid that's a football kid that's in class struggling as some kid that, wants to play video games, doesn't want anything to do with sports, because that's my job is to try to, find out 10, 15 years down the line, these guys are doing something amazing. And maybe you had some small little role and just kind of like lighting that fire for them to kind of see it in themselves. Because that's what a lot of the kids, they come from situations where maybe they don't have that positive reinforcement. They're being told that they can't do these things. And so, we can provide opportunities for them to succeed. And hopefully that will light the fire for them to progress and become a big member of our society and a participant in our society. And not somebody, who has regrets or makes excuses, but somebody that goes out and, also pays it forward.
Awesome. Yeah, there's so much of what you just said that I resonate with, and I don't know what it's like in your school. I know that we talk about ACEs training and people that have so many difficulties in their background. So as educators and coaches, we want to connect with those kids. Yet at the same time, there's the risk management side saying, hey, we can't connect. You're their coach or you're this. You can't be their counselor. You can't. Yet I think that most of us in high school teaching and coaching probably wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the ability to try and reach beyond the classroom or the ball field, right? So what would you say to an administrator about specifically, connecting with kids on a personal level? Obviously, there's got to be boundaries for other issues that are going on today, but just the importance there of connecting from the administrative side.
Well, I think that the important thing is, like you said, that, the kids, the time and the love that we put in, they're going to share things, and we want them to be able to do that. You want every kid in school, if there's something going on, to have somebody, an adult, somebody they can turn to, and share those things. And I think the big part of it is, for me, I've worked with really great administrators that have been very supportive on that end. And I also think the other part of it is, talking about understanding kind of what our capabilities are. And so a big part of it is helping them and being a counselor, but also then recognizing certain situations for what they are, and then getting them the help, the resources, that they need to be able to be successful. And also at the same time, having that reporting aspect, but also honoring their confidentiality. So I think it is a fine line, but at the end of the day, I think if you do what's best and what's right for the kid centered, I really believe that's what's going to carry you. I mean, I've worked with some teachers that are, I would say, characters, to say the least, but and they would do some things, maybe push the envelope, even in the classroom a little bit. But the kids knew that the teacher was there for them, was working hard, and loved them. And so those individuals the kids will take care of those individuals. And so that's kind of the dynamic. It's kind of a messy thing, education. But
sorry for the interruption one more time. Great answer on, that fine line for teachers and coaches, on how to handle working with kids. I love the idea of just keeping the kids first, keep them in mind and what's best for them. Obviously there's mandatory reporting and when that's not necessary, confidentiality and all those things. But a couple more things for you. You touched on mentorship, being a mentor. Who has been a significant mentor in your life?
Well, I've had a couple. That's a great question that I could really think of. First one would be my great grandmother, who basically, like I said, all the way through this kind of interesting upbringing that I had, was always involved in my life and was always kind of in the center as far as looking out for me. And basically, we maintain that commitment until she passed away my first year of teaching in 1996. And so she was definitely someone who was kind of in my corner, that, the positive, always, you can do this, and really kind of nurturing those aspects. Another mentor for me was my high school coach, Tom Moore, and a little different just by example. He was, the thing I took away from him is that basically just hard, if you're working hard and you're outworking the other person, you're going to be successful. And when he came to Prosser, when I was in school, we had pretty good teams, and we didn't necessarily have some of the same dudes that they had coming through at various points. But that was at the beginning of the era of actually having a weights conditioning program. I think we were probably one of the first schools to do that. And we just basically, we lifted weights, we ran. We were doing things that kind of everyone does now, but nobody was really doing it then. We were going to camp in Idaho before it was a thing. And we just worked. And so it created that culture, that confidence, where that's kind of my mantra. And, in football is that not going to try to out scheme anybody or do anything like that. We're going to just put the work in and physically take care of business and be very fundamentally sound. So I take that away from him. He was very attention to detail oriented on that. And that was something I always remember. And then last but not least, my parents, very just really interesting story. When I moved to Prosser when I was 10 years old, 1982, my mom was married. And then over the time I was there for about 3 months, she ended up going through a really horrific divorce. And long story short, she'd been a stay-at-home mom, hadn't worked. Her husband was an insurance executive, and so he was doing the work, bringing home the food, and she was kind of taking care of the house. And so all of a sudden, she was divorced and with 4 boys and a girl at the time, and she had to really make some tough decisions. And so that point, she just basically, she stuck with us and was committed. And in my back of my mind, I'm thinking, shoot, I might be getting shipped out again here. Things are going pretty bad, and she showed that, that commitment, that love. To this day, there's nothing that she wouldn't do. And then when I was 14 years old, my dad, who my mom remarried, and her husband basically was kind of like living the life of Riley. We raced dune buggies. He had every toy, motorcycles, this, that, snowmobiles, you name it, he had it. And all of a sudden, for whatever reason, he decided to take on this family unit and became kind of the father for everyone, father figure. And so just showing that, the grace and just that, to me, that's just a tremendous, you don't hear about those stories a lot. You hear the other stories about people, shirking on their responsibilities. And so the two of them, what they've done for our family is just, it's unbelievable, really. And it continues because I have some younger siblings that are still struggling and battling some different issues. Younger brother of mine passed away a couple months ago. And so our family story kind of continues. And I joke with them, they're retired, but they're working as hard as ever. And that, I think that's kind of parenthood. And that, for me, that kind of showed me, that you make those commitments. And I think that's an important piece and a thing that I really treasure about them and respect and love about them, that they are just awesome in that regard. And the commitment and the sacrifice they've shown to my brothers and sisters, just, I think it's unmatched.
I love the word commitment. I think it's not a word that we use and hold to well enough in our society today. So awesome. What would be an idea or two that you have to move our country forward in the racial divide?
I think, like I said, over time, I think things are happening, and I think that we are moving in those directions. I think that people talk about hearts and minds, and so the education piece, as far as being able to get people to critically think about things, and also to, if you have a belief on something, to be able to put that under scrutiny and to challenge it. And then the heart piece of it, like I said, is important. I think that at the end of the day, in America, there's a quote that somebody made. I'm not sure who made it, but I think it's great. It's like, in America, we always get it right after we exhaust all the other options. And it's kind of like that battle, that process of just kind of working through all these things. So I think that the biggest one for me is being able to have the kids, and when I look at education, is having them be able to critically think and to be able to engage in debate. I think one of the things that's interesting, I've always loved to debate / argue and just learn people's other perspectives. But I think generationally, sometimes I think kids more now sometimes get uncomfortable thinking that's I want to do that. And to me, that's, if it's done the right way and it's done respectful, I think that's what we need. And I think that's how we have moved forward over time. So it's pretty much people having their ideas coming out, being able to debate, articulate those ideas, okay, but not necessarily everyone being in their own little corner, and getting, their information and then not wanting to engage with others. And so when I hear people, talk about, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, and these labels and the radical, the right, the reactionary, all these things, to me, it doesn't really do us any good, because I've always taught kids that conservative, liberal, doesn't matter. Everyone wants the country to move in the right direction. I believe they want, have their family and provide for the family and do those things. They just maybe disagree about what the best way forward is. But I think we need to get back to that. I think there was a period of time in our history where there was way more, I want to say, compromise, where people would work together. I feel like we're in an era now that it's kind of like a winner take all mentality. And I don't know if it's not reality, right? And so I think that just getting people to be able to listen and really just process that and then work from there, I think, is really the key moving forward.
That's great. Bringing people together and having healthy discussions where you can sit down and actually express opinions and disagree, but respectfully. Last thing, what gives you the greatest hope? And then after that, if there's anything else that you wanted to touch on, I'll let you close us out.
Yeah. I think as a teacher and a student of history, if you look at history and you can look at different times in our history where situation has been very dire, and it's like, are we gonna, is the United States gonna survive this? You could go back to the Civil War. You could go to the pandemic. Well, we're in the COVID, but the pandemic, Spanish flu. You talk about World War I, World War II, the Cold War. I mean, there's all these 9/11. There's all these different things that have happened, and it generally the theme is that people kind of come together. And like I said, at the end of the day, I believe that most people are good. But I also believe that it's important for people to engage and do that work together. And so I think the being in education, one thing I love about it, I love being around younger people. Talk about, being in education, you might get some gray hairs, but it keeps you younger because you're always engaged with younger kids and that idealism that they have. And sometimes, some people would say there may be the naivete. I feel at the end of the day, there's always going to be, when there's a crisis, there's a thing that Mike Price put up a thing at a clinic years ago, and it was a word. It just said, they put it up on the screen, and then he asked, what's it say on there? And somebody said, opportunity is nowhere, because that's, what it said. But if you look at it the other way, it says opportunity is now here. And that's kind of the way that I like to look at things, that when there's a situation, it's like, oh, this is horrible, but man, what a great opportunity to try to come up with a solution or something to fix that or to move beyond that. And I think that, the generation, I think they have that, that enthusiasm is supported by, if you look at our history, to me, that's our history. Obviously, we're still evolving and we need to have more, but as we kind of move forward, that's kind of the optimism that you need to have to move forward. And so that part for me tells me going to I might take more time than we want, but I feel that that's our history, and that's kind of what we are about as Americans.
Awesome. Well, DJ, it's a real pleasure. I can't wait till we get a chance to see each other in person again, and really look forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you for doing this, Coach. This is great, and I've enjoyed watching the interviews that you've had, and a lot of the guys I know as well. So it's kind of a cool thing to be able to do this and continue to do this work. I think it's important for people to see.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right.